just down the road from where a few years ago I had previously lived in Southeast Australia, is the opening into 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger. Do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was driving out around 11:30 p.m. with my girlfriend, and as we were in the area, decided to show her the woodlands while we were in the area, as she loves everything to do with nature. And it was summer, so it was an extremely warm night. I left my car with the lights shining into the trees, as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black. And the two of us just kind of started chatting, having a smoke and generally relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been put in some plastic, and while I was keeping an eye on the trees, I had a feeling that something was just wrong. I've heard a few people say that they felt that they were in danger, although nothing around them was off, and it was this same feeling. Every sense was almost reaching out and my adrenaline was up, but there wasn't really anything in my eye line that seemed any different. After lighting another cigarette to calm my nerves, I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different to before. It was only after staring into the dark that I saw that there was moonlight now lighting up the grass, where it couldn't before, as there was a black shape blocking that before, whereas I thought it was a tree. The only way to describe was that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent. And a few seconds later, this disgusting feeling of dread fell over me, and I saw motion in the dark of the path as this thing crawled towards us on all fours. I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe. But somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding itself from us, but just slowly crawling forward towards us. I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, but I couldn't look away. Just where it reached the line where my car lights were able to illuminate, it reared up onto two legs and just sat staring at us. I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another metre larger than me, with arms that were too long that reached down near the ground, and all I could make out was off-white, almost yellowish fur on it, and in the dim light, could make out a silhouette of its head, and it looked like a dog or a wolf. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it was at this point my girlfriend gasped, which seemed to break off whatever was stopping me from thinking logically. I grabbed her by the arm and sprinted to my car, slammed the doors and tore out of there as fast as I could, both of us too scared to speak until about half an hour later. We've both discussed it many times, and the feeling that we had was what I can imagine a rabbit sees when it catches a wolf or a fox looking at it, that this is something that would be able to end us with absolute ease if it so chose. Neither of us have been able to come up with any explanation for what it was, but it has definitely changed the way I view the woods and the bush. And when I go camping or hiking now, I think back to that and wonder what it was, and if I will ever see anything like it again.
G'day all. Not sure if this fits with the theme here, but here's my story anyways. You be the judge. I think this must have been about a decade or so ago. I grew up in Kempsey, smallish little town about halfway between Coffs and Port, and a little ways inland. There's some really great camping around those parts, with the Mackley River going through there. So me and the lads, we geared up for a weekend out in the scrub. We got there a little bit late, I guess, around 6ish, and we start setting up camp. We busted out the beers by this point, of course. Hey, gotta make up for lost time. We were all laughing and having a pretty good time joking around, as you do. Anyways, one of our group, I'll call him Larry. He's not really getting into the spirit of it. Just real quiet. Larry's part Indigenous, and he grew up with a big family who were very in touch with their roots. We ribbed him a bit, trying to get him to liven up, but when he still looked sheepish, we asked him what was going on. He wouldn't mention anything specific, just kept on telling us that we should really find a different spot. We probably should have listened to him, but the only two of us with our license were on our P-plates, and we'd already been drinking. Plan was to sober up a day before we head back in so we'd be good to drive. We weren't going to risk it. The evening went on largely uneventfully, although Larry continued to act funny. Just go lay in his swag rather than join in with the rest of us. We weren't bothered. If he wasn't into it, we weren't going to let that bugger it up for the rest of us. So we spent the evening dropping a line in, never caught nothing. Drank some more, lit up the fire, drank some more. I guess that overindulgence was why I wasn't too startled at first when I looked over into the scrub and noticed something odd. Not really sure what was going on at first, but it seemed to me like some of the taller shrubs were waving in the breeze in abnormal patterns, if that makes sense. The first thing that seemed off was the fact that there really was no significant breeze to speak of. The second thing that seemed off was just the motions that they were moving in, like they were stuttering back and forth, side to side. It just felt unnatural. We were coming up with all sorts of wild theories about what this could be, trying to make a joke out of it, as usual. One of the lads went to get up and have a closer look, when out of the blue, "Stop." We all froze. The voice, it came from Larry's swag, and he was staring at us with a mix of complete and total seriousness and cold, dead fear. He just looked at us and shook his head. So we all sat back down and just waited. We waited for, I don't know, I guess it was like 10 minutes or so, but it sure felt like a whole lot longer than that. We sat and waited and watched as these shrubs continued to move about. We watched as they began to move further from side to side. We watched as they began to move faster. And we watched as they began to move towards us. I've never felt more terrified than in that single moment, watching as these things started stuttering towards our camp. The way they moved, it was like watching one of those old-time asylum horror movies. You know, where the ghost would kinda flicker in and out of sight, getting closer each time. As they grew closer, we started seeing them for what they were. They were more like aliens than anything else. Like the typical image of an alien. Tall, lanky. But they were all dark and shadowy. I think they made it within about 10 feet of us before they started drifting back toward the tree line. I don't know what the reasoning was, whether they determined that we were not a threat to them, whether they weren't there to cause harm, or whether they just couldn't be bothered with us. Who knows? Anyway, Larry said that these things, they were called quinkins. He said his parents would always tell him stories about them. The creepiest thing about the quinkin is no one really knows what they are or what they're about. There's a ton of different theories from different tribes in different parts of the country, but no real answer on what they are. Best guess Larry can come up with is that there's some sort of spirit projection or lost soul trapped here between worlds. Why are they trapped? Why are they not allowed to enter the next world? Well, being 10 foot away from the bloody things. That's the question that still haunts me today.
I've been a long-time lurker on Reddit, especially this forum, and I finally decided to post this life-changing and defining experience that I had when I was about 9 or 10 years old. So, when I say life-changing and defining, I truly do mean that. Ever since I had this experience, I have had an obsession with the other world, and I know in my heart that there is a lot more to this earth than what we can see with our eyes. I had a lot of really strange experiences at this property, but what I'm writing about was the beginning of a weird few years. Backtrack about 13 years ago, and I'm 9 or 10 years old. My parents and I had just moved up to a mountain in the Gold Coast hinterland, Tamborine Mountain, which is in Australia. Absolutely beautiful place, full of national parks and tropical rainforests. To explain the layout of our old property, there was the main house, and about 100 metres to the left of the main house was a large shed. Separating the main house from the shed was a garden area with a little path leading from the shed to the house. It was just after dark, 7 p.m. My mum was inside the main house making dinner, and for some reason, I was with my dad at the shed while he was unloading things from the back of the truck with one of his mates. I helped for a little bit, but when it came to the bigger objects, I was just sitting around, admiring our new beautiful property. I can still remember this like it happened yesterday. So I'm sitting down and waiting for my dad to finish up so we can go back to the main house. And for some reason, and to this day, I still do not know why, I had this intense urge to look over to my right into the bushes, which separated the main house from the shed. At first, I couldn't really tell what it was, but the longer I stared at it, the more I realised it was not a trick of the light or my imagination. About 30 feet away from me was a small thing walking parallel to where I was sitting, wading through the bushes. It was walking at a normal pace, but pushing the bushes back to make way for itself. I could only see the side profile of this thing, but I could see that over its body, it was wearing something black, almost like a black cloak. From the side profile of its face, I could make out a pointed nose with sharp cheekbones and a large hole where I'm assuming its eye was. It was probably about 3 or 4 feet high and had the stature of a small child. I saw it for probably about 5 seconds. I think that was probably the first time in my life I had an adrenaline rush. My heart dropped to my stomach and I felt sick and confused. I couldn't speak or move. All I could feel was utter fear and terror. I stood up and quickly bolted inside to the shed and waited for my dad to finish up, because no way in hell was I going to walk back to the house by myself. It never looked at me. For all I know, it could have been before, but when I saw it, it didn't look at me or acknowledge me. I didn't sleep in my own bed until I was 13 after that experience. I was utterly scared of the dark, and still to this day. I don't like going outside after dark by myself. The older I got, the more I began to research paranormal topics. I tried for so long to convince myself that this was just a hallucination, but I know in my heart it wasn't. The best description that I could give, it would be, it looked like an alien grey. But the thing is, it still had proportionate features, if that makes any sense. I know this sounds insane, but it had the features of a goblin, pointed ears, and a sharp cheekbone. It was definitely wearing something black over the top of its shoulders, as I did not see legs. The most screwed up aspect of this experience for me is that to this day, I still have weird nightmares about that property. I've never forgotten that night, or how it has moulded and changed my perception of this world. There is so much more out there that we don't know about.
The Kuracha. The year was 1994. I was in 7th grade at the time, along with my cousins, Carlos, Chanel, and Shyla. We went to school on Palm Island, but on the holidays, we'd visit my uncles, aunts, and my cousins out near Devonport in the Northern Territory. It was on one of these visits that my story takes place. It was a normal day like pretty much any other. Me and my cousins, we'd spend our days out in the bush, playing Baramba Gimby and Chubu Chubu. During one of our games, my cousin Carlos, he remarked about a set of prints in the dirt, just out by the tree line. We investigated, and they were a bit odd, but I thought they must just be an emu, or maybe an ostrich. We do get them out here occasionally, wandering out from the farms. After a tiring day of playing out on the plains, my uncle called us in for tucker. We had damper and a nice hot stew. After dinner, we just played outside a bit longer. We got big floodlights outside our place, so it's safe for us to play at night until bedtime. My uncles just tell us don't wander too far and we're all good. So anyway, we play another few rounds of Chubu Chubu before we end up getting tired and make our way inside for bedtime. The way our house out there's set up, we got the living area and the kitchen on the ground floor, and also a bathroom and a toilet down there. Upstairs there's Auntie and Uncle's room off to the right and my other uncle's room on the left. Down the hall there's a really big bedroom with bunk beds for all us kids. Back then we had a telly set up in there with a Super Nintendo, so we never really got much sleep after we went to bed. We were up late that night, playing games, when we hear the dogs start barking, real loud, just out the front of the house, round where we were playing earlier, and something else, howling back at the dogs from out bush, maybe like a dingo or something. We did get dingoes out there, so I quickly run downstairs to grab the dogs and bring them inside. I went outside and grabbed them, and true God, I've never seen them so scared like they were that night. But anyway, I grabbed their leads and bring them upstairs with us kids. They was acting real strange, nuzzling in real close with us kids, sitting in front of us almost like they were shielding us from someone. That was when I heard my uncles talking from one of the rooms. They were real hush about it, but we could hear them from our room. Then, the door handle to us kids' room started turning, and the door slowly opened. It was my uncle and auntie. As soon as they saw me, they grabbed me by the arm and pulled me up and hugged me. They told me they saw me go outside, not to do that again at night without asking. They then gestured for us all to follow them into the bedroom up the hall. My auntie and uncle's bedroom, it's got a big window that faces out the front yard. My other uncle was standing there with him, and everyone was just staring out there, into the dark. I was real scared by this point, and I didn't know what was going on. So, I asked my other uncle, and he just whispered to me, "Uncle think Kadacha out there." I shivered when I heard him say that. A Kadacha. It's like a witch doctor, or kinda like a skinwalker. He's known as the executioner man in our native language. That's when I remember those tracks we seen earlier, ones that look kinda like emu. The old stories we were always told, they tell us about the Kadacha and how he wears big emu feathers on his feet, stuck on there with dried blood. We can't really see anything out there in the dark, so my uncle tells one of the kids to run downstairs and turn on the floodlights. My cousin run downstairs, and a minute later, the floodlights come on. Right there, in the middle of the front yard, was a huge-looking dingo. That's not what scared me that time, though. What scared me was the fact that this dingo was standing up on his back legs, the legs all straightened out and thick like a person. On his feet, big, thick feathers. He just stared right at that window. It took us a few seconds of shock, but my uncle quickly shuts the curtains and tells us to get down on the ground. The Kadacha, he had a bone in his hand. My uncle, he said No doubt, we stayed there a minute longer and he would have started pointing the bone at us. Point the bone's an ancient ritual in our culture. It is evil magic, and it's forbidden. It's carried out with a long, sharp bone. When it's pointed at your enemies, they die. Might take a week, might take a year, but they always die. What scares me most about what happened that night, it isn't seeing the thing standing there in the yard, and it wasn't the bone in his hand, although I am thankful for my uncle's quick thinking. Nah, what scares me most is thinking back to when we were playing in that yard and walking right over to that dark tree line, looking at those fresh prints. He could have been right there the whole time. And later that night, when I run out to grab those dogs, he was right there near me, looking at me. I was totally exposed and vulnerable, and I didn't even know it. If you ever make your way to Australia, be careful in the outback. There's unseen things you don't understand out here, and never could understand. But they see you, clear as day. And some of them, they haven't learned to tell the difference between friend and foe.